Great. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening and some of you this morning and afternoon. So we've got people from all over the globe joining us this evening. Thank you so much for your time. I'll go through a quick few housekeeping things to start with, and then we'll do some introductions and get going. So we've got cameras and mics disabled just to make sure that we have a nice uninterrupted session. But what we will have is the chat bot as well. So if you have any questions come up during the session, we will be taking note of the questions, and we will be doing a Q&A at the end of the session. So the actual presentation is going to be about 30 minutes long, and then we'll do about 10-15 minutes at the end of Q&A. And also just to let you know that this is recorded as well, and you will get a copy of this recording at the end of the session at the beginning of next week as well. So tonight is going to be on caring for exotic species in the veterinary practice and hospital. We've got Dr. Sonia Miles with us, who is going to be running the session, and a little bit about me and Brinsley products as well. So my name's Holly Edwards. I'm the Veterio sales specialist for Brinsley products. So Veterio Intensive Care is a brand that we've been running now for nearly 20 years. We manufacture them in the UK, so they're intensive care units that range in size, and we made them basically to support veterinary staff in a busy veterinary practice to really improve the care of your patients. So that's exotic species, and that's small cats and dogs as well. So we will be going through a bit more information about these as well. But we go quite nicely in hand with Sonia at Just Exotic. So Sonia uses our incubators on a daily basis, which you'll find out a bit more about soon. And so we both wanted to do this presentation to be able to increase the knowledge of how to support those exotic patients of yours on a day-to-day basis. So what I'll do is I'll hand you over to Sonia. She'll do a little introduction, and then we'll start the presentation. Thank you so much again for joining, everyone, and over to you, Sonia.
Thanks, Holly. Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoy the presentation. I hope you get something useful from it as well. Like Holly said, I use these incubators all the time in our practice. They're absolutely invaluable when working with exotic species. And the aim of today's presentation is essentially to go through how we look after exotics in practice, and also how we can implement the use of the incubators in practice as well. So for those of you that I haven't met before and you haven't been to any of my presentations, my name is Sonia. I am an RCVS recognised advanced practitioner in zoological medicine. I'm also a WA VMA certified aquatic species vet, so not really using incubators in our aquatic species, but I have got those advanced qualifications as well. And I'm the head vet for Highcroft Exotic Vets in Bristol. It's a first opinion and referral exotic species service. And in my infinite wisdom, alongside my full-time hours as a vet, I decided that I was going to run my own business, which is called Just Exotics. And it is designed to teach general practitioners how to look after exotic species in practice. So I have two websites. One is on-demand content, which there is a substantial amount of free content on there as well. It's free to sign up to both of the websites. They've deliberately been created to help people give the best possible care to these species that can be a little bit more complicated. And then the second website covers all of my kind of like in-person events. So I'll give you some QR codes a little later on, and I'll refer to these websites as we go through, because there's going to be sections where we're going to talk about care sheets, and these are one of the many things that you can get for free through the Just Exotics website. So, as we've said, we're going to go through caring for exotic species in hospital. And what I've done is I've put a couple of the kind of objectives that I'm aiming to cover today. So we want to understand the unique hospitalization needs of exotic species because they can be very, very different to cats and dogs, which most people are familiar with. We want to learn how to optimize their care using the Veterio incubators, and we'll go through a little later on why and how I use these incubators in practice. We want to be provided enhanced protocols for exotic animals in hospital. They're not straightforward. So we have got some things that are fairly straightforward to implement, but equally some that do need a little bit of consideration and essentially just make you guys feel a little bit more confident in dealing with exotic species in practice. And certainly when it comes to hospitalizing these various different species. Now, for these incubators and for this hospitalization kind of lecture in general, we're going to be covering these kind of broad speaking species. So rabbits, rodents, and ferrets from the mammal side of things, but our avian patients as well. And that can go for birds of prey, that's parrots, passerines, chickens, and waterfowl. We're not going to speak about hospitalization of reptiles because actually we don't use the incubators for reptiles, but there is a slide a little later on as to why we specifically don't use the incubators for reptiles and use Vivaria instead. So, when it comes to hospitalizing exotic species, there are some general environmental considerations that we need to have in mind. Now, many of these exotic patients, they are prey species. And as prey species, you want to minimize stress associated with being hospitalized as much as is possible. Now, how do we do that? Well, initially, what we want to do is that we want to minimize that stress as much as is possible because we know that prey species, they're going to hide signs of pain and illness as much as they possibly can, often presenting in really quite debilitated states. And if we stress these individuals out at any point of that hospitalization process, then that is just going to add to the issues. So, if we have a prey species, ideally, we should be keeping them away from the sight, the sound, and the smell of predators from admit all the way through to discharge. Now, I appreciate that I am in a very privileged position that I am able to do that in the practice that I work in. We have a separate waiting room, a separate consultation room. Our exotics department is upstairs, away from all the cats and the dogs. It is fairly straightforward for us to do that. And it can be incredibly challenging in first opinion practice to achieve those things. And I absolutely understand that. But wherever possible, we want to be trying to aim to separate these individuals because adding to the stress of a sick prey species, you're on the back foot already. We're just going to make that situation worse. Now, ways that we can minimize it. Well, obviously, we won't want to be hospitalizing our rabbits with our dogs, for example. If you've literally just got a cat or a dog ward, you physically have nowhere else to put your rabbits, then putting them with the cats is going to be far preferable to be putting in with the dogs. Equally, how I started off was essentially incredibly inconvenienced all of my colleagues by setting up a dog kennel in the vet's room and keeping the rabbits in there until everybody got absolutely sick and tired of it and gave me my own space. So there are ways around separating them completely. You just have to be maybe a little bit inventive if you haven't got the facilities set up. And that does involve minimizing footfall as well. With people coming and going all the time, that's incredibly stressful as well. Now, that's easier said than done, especially if you've got maybe something a little bit more exciting coming into your practice and everybody wants to see it. Hands up, I do become quite militant in our department when it comes to that because that's incredibly stressful for those patients when everyone's getting excited and wanting to come and visit them. Again, minimizing that stress as much as is possible. We want to be keeping that environmental noise to a minimum. That's not just from people, so keeping your voice down when you're around these patients if they're really, really sick, but keeping the volume down from other patients as well. And I would argue and say that actually many of my small rodents, my rabbits, are probably far more stressed with a screaming parrot than they ever would be if someone was to briefly bring a ferret into the room and then leave again. So just bear in mind that there can be lots of things that are quite scary. Now, cage positioning does play a role as well. And what I mean by that is that we don't want unneutered rabbits right next to each other where they can smell each other. We don't want birds facing each other. They should be all facing the same way because it can be quite threatening. The same with regards to putting birds at certain different heights. It would be quite abnormal for a parrot to be on the floor, and that could be perceived as quite stressful for them, whereas that's actually a perfect position for a chicken, for example. So the height that we place these individuals in enclosures plays a massive role. Whether they're facing or next to other individuals as well will also need to be considered. And as does your environmental temperature. Most of the time, if you're over 22 degrees, you're pretty good. So most of our rabbits need to be at a minimum of 22 degrees. So it's a little bit warm for us at the best of times, but it does mean that we just need to it just stabilizes them a little bit easier if your environmental temperature doesn't get too low. The same as too hot as well. Chinchillas, for example, temperatures over kind of like 24, 26 degrees, they are going to find incredibly stressful. So making sure that your environmental temperature doesn't get too hot and doesn't get too cold. If we do obviously need to warm up our patient's temperature, then that's where the incubators come in, because we can provide a focal temperature for that specific individual without affecting the others in that ward as well. The one thing that I actually just realized I've missed off here as well is that the lighting of the environment is also really, really important. So if we've got lots of sick patients, having the ability to dim the lights, put the blinds down on the windows, some way of minimizing that is ideal. And actually using LED lighting over fluorescent lighting is really important as well, because birds can perceive the flashing of a fluorescent light. If you've ever done slow-mo on your phone in a room that is lit by a fluorescent light, you'll see it flashing. The birds can actually perceive that with their vision, and that over a period of time can be pretty stressful for them. So in using LED lighting rather than the fluorescent, then that can make a big difference too. So, other general considerations that we need to bear in mind, well, wherever possible, we need to have a fear-free approach. Now, that is easier said than done in many instances. Thinking about birds, for example, well, a fear-free approach would involve a lot of positive reinforcement training, and that relies on your clients having implemented that to make your life a lot easier. I have some individuals that see me on a regular basis that have been taught to have towels put around their shoulders, have a stethoscope put on their chest. I even had one parrot once that we'd given one of our old induction masks, and the owner had taught them to put the head in the induction mask, all through positive reinforcement. That's not always going to be a possibility. That obviously takes a substantial amount of time. But implementing all these environmental things that we've already discussed, but also implementing your you're minimizing your footfall and removing the predators, that is also going to allow you to be a fear-free. It doesn't just come down to specifically to handling these individuals, but wherever possible, absolutely, we should be minimizing the handling of these individuals. And what we tend to try and do in our practice is we're going to have to at some point, but we try and lump everything together. So when we're hospitalizing them, if they're due medications, we will do their TPR checks at the same time. And you have periods of time in between where we completely hands off, that we're only distance examining these individuals. The housing, I don't actually have anything particularly very exciting in my practice. They're actually old cat kennels. The it's easy to do, it's easy to implement. You don't have to have fancy bits of equipment. Essentially, all I have is just your standard kennels. And when it comes to my avian patients, I encourage my owners to bring in enclosures from home that are small, that can slide into them. So you haven't got a small bird ping-ponging around in the inside of a kennel and it flies out and you're having an absolute nightmare catching them. We do have large indoor rabbit cages, and walking kennels can be also utilised, especially when we've got individuals that we're encouraging to bring in their companions as well, to again minimise the stress associated with being hospitalised away from their bonded companions. But essentially in our practice, I don't have anything particularly very fancy at all. Straightforward kenneling can be utilised for many of our exotic patients. And I think the only things that we really do have to bear in mind is that when we have really, really small individuals, like our rodents, for example, that the cage fronts are small enough that they can't escape. Same with ferrets. If they can get their head out of a hole, the rest of their body is going to follow as well. So just bearing in mind that we do maybe need some minor adjustments to it to make sure that it's safe for these individuals. We can provide enrichment in practice. So enrichment, let's face it, is normally for the companions, because if you've got a really, really sick individual, they're not going to be showing their normal behaviors. They're not going to engage with any enrichment that you are providing them. And that can be as simple as a stick of Brussels sprouts, for example, that birds absolutely love destroying. It keeps them entertained. These are actually my birds in the background in here, and they literally just spent a whole day destroying it, ate very little of it. The house absolutely stank afterwards, but things like this can be utilized in practice as well. But it is predominantly from the companion that is able to display normal behaviors. But even if you've got, I don't know, a routine rabbit neutering, for example, what we'll sometimes do is we'll get a toilet roll tube, we'll stuff it with some treats and stuff it with some hay, that when they're waiting to go through their anesthetic, then they've got something to do as well. So bearing in mind that that can keep these guys occupied. Food and water essentially doesn't really matter what they are fed. We need to continue that, even if it is not a suitable diet for that individual. It is completely inappropriate to change a diet for a sick individual whilst they are sick. There are plenty of care sheets and diet sheets on the Just Exotics website. Like I said, completely free to sign up and completely free to access these as well. And explanation sheets as to why seed-based diets are not suitable for birds and how to convert a seed diet bird onto a pelleted-based diet. These are all things that can be downloaded, given to clients, that they can go away, have a read, and then when that individual is feeling a lot better, then deal with changing the diet. But whilst they are hospitalized with you, you need to feed them a food that they are familiar with, but most importantly, in a way that they are familiar with. So for me, I don't like water bottles. I think they're an absolute nightmare. It just takes the individual so long to actually drink any helpful amount of fluid. So a water bowl would be preferable. However, deal with that later, teach them to use a water bowl later. If they've only ever used a water bottle, then we need to be providing that in practice as well. If we have a species that is companionable, we should be considering bringing their friends with them at home. One of the things that we teach our reception team is that if it's a rabbit, a guinea pig, a chinchilla, for example, or even a bird with a friend, I'll get our reception team to go, please bring with them when they're coming into hospital their friend, bring a lunchbox of their favorite foods, those foods that they're familiar with, because that is going to help minimize stress in the practice. It's also going to minimize stress to that individual that's going to be left at home otherwise as well. Obviously, it's extra work for our nursing team, so we do have to bear that in mind as well. And it does require very accurate observations when it comes to hospitalizing them, so you know who's eating and who's pooing, but it does minimize that stress. And again, that's one of the things that can really help these individuals recover post GA, but also post, I don't know, rabbit with ileus, for example. Having their friend there, they will get over it a lot faster. However we hospitalize them, we do need to be maintaining good biosecurity. Now, that is not just between patients and patients, but that's between patients and us as well. So many diseases from our exotic patients are zoonotic, certainly in our reptiles, which I appreciate we're not really going into today, but our avian patients for sure. Any sick bird, as far as I'm concerned, has probably got psittacosis or chlamydia until proven otherwise. So we should be wearing PPE when we're handling them until we've proven that they are negative. And we should be maintaining appropriate hygiene in between everything as well, and having enclosures that allow thorough disinfection in an appropriate way with appropriate equipment, with appropriate disinfectants and appropriate contact time is really, really important. So these are just kind of like some broad generalized considerations that need to be considered when it comes to exotics. Now, the importance of some specialized equipment when it comes to dealing with exotic patients. So we know that in comparison to cats and dogs, exotics have unique physiological and anatomical needs that need to be addressed and supported. And this is where the Veterio incubators really, really, really come into their own, is that I genuinely, I wouldn't be able to do half of what I do without them. We've got a number of them in our practice. It's super helpful. We use them 5, 10, 15 times a day, depending on the caseload that we've got. And there's always something in them while we've got our patients hospitalized. So they're really, really important. And they do help us support those unique anatomical and physiological differences. The ways that we hospitalize our patient, again, Stress reduction, really, really critical. I will keep hammering that home because it is one of the most important points. And like I said, some minor tailoring to the environmental conditions is really required. So again, keeping them away from the cats and dogs. Because most of the patients, certainly the ones that we're discussing today, excluding the ferrets, are prey species, they will have hidden signs of pain and illness up until the point that they are physiologically and physically incapable of doing it anymore, which means that by the time that they present to us in practice, they are going to be really, really sick. And that means that we're already on the back foot. We really need to stabilize these individuals, undergo our diagnostics, support them in a way that allows us to implement the treatment. But again, we were already behind because they've spent so long going, no, everything is absolutely fine, when the reality of it is that absolutely it is not. And using these specialist equipments like the Veterio incubators is going to allow us to do that. So, this is a fantastic document. I have to say that because I wrote it. That is hopefully going to be really, really helpful for those of you in practice wanting to use incubators for exotic species. Is essentially everything in this presentation written down in a summarized form. It's got, you'll recognize some of the charts that I've popped in some of the presentations as well. And you can literally just download a PDF of this straight from the internet. We've got one in our practice. We've laminated it. So okay, my team are comfortable using incubators, but if our first opinion team are holding the fort while we're not in, at least they've got a guide. And those of them that have read this and used it have found it really, really useful. Certainly when it comes to kind of like the humidities and temperatures that we're aiming for with these sick individuals as well. So please go and download it. It is a fantastic bit of information. And Veterio have got some other ones as well. Specifically, there's one on wildlife as well, which is really, really good. So, when do I use incubators? Essentially, all the time. I've already said literally multiple times a day, all day, every day. We literally turn them on in the morning, and if I haven't got patients in them by the end of the night, they're turned off and they've been on all day. Now, the cases that I specifically use them in, every anaesthetic post GA will go into the incubator afterwards. This is apart from reptiles, amphibians, and fish, obviously, and I'll explain in a minute why that's the case. But all of my avian patients, when they're up and about and mooching around after their anaesthetic, they will go into the incubator because it is warm and it is an oxygen-rich environment. But also all of my mammalian species as well. They will wake up from the anaesthetic, we're actively warming them, and we are providing an oxygen-rich environment. Now, we know that our exotic patients have higher anesthetic risks than many of our other patients that we work with. And the main reason for that is often hypothermia. And okay, a lot of people worry about the anesthetics, which fair enough, like anesthetics in exotic species can be scary, but actually it's the recovery period of which they are far more likely to die. I think the statistics say that they are 3 times more likely to die in the first few hours post anesthetic than any other time of that procedure. And one thing that really helps with that is keeping them warm and keeping them in an oxygen-rich environment. And that is exactly what the incubators do. So I use it for all of my post-anesthetic patients. I'll obviously use it in my hypothermic patients, but I will be setting the temperature so it is relevant for that individual species, but that individual case. If I've got dyspneic patients, then yes, I will be using that almost like an oxygen tent. If they're normothermic, then I won't necessarily be putting a very, very high temperature on in there, but I will certainly be providing them with an oxygen-rich environment. If I have a patient that needs to be confined, so for those of you that have seen those kind of cartwheeling rabbits that have got echiniculae that are just rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling, that can really be a massive, massive problem and cause quite a lot of damage to those individuals. And one thing that the incubators are really, really helpful, again, oxygen-rich environment, these individuals are probably hyperventilating because they're freaking out as what is specifically is going on. But because they're a small confined environment, actually what often happens is the rabbit kind of rolls into a corner, pins themselves in, and then they just feel a little bit more steady. So if I've got an individual that needs to be confined into the incubator, and if I have an individual that is particularly scared or is particularly very, very anxious, these can easily be covered with a towel or a blanket. And if they are, again, anxious, they may be hyperventilating, we can provide them with an oxygen-rich environment. It's nice and warm in there, cover it up. hopefully they're freaking out a little less in a situation like that as well. So why do I use incubators? Well, the anesthetic risks that we talked about before, that post-operative period is really the riskiest time, and uncontrolled hypothermia is the biggest reason as to why that general anesthetic, post-general anesthetic time is the riskiest. So always use it because of that. Prey species, we've already mentioned, they're hiding signs of illness, so they're often substantially sicker than they seem. And I think I'm in a really, really fortunate situation because my owners, I think, come to us because we offer an advanced service. So I definitely don't see the standard first opinion clients that go, oh, well, it's just a rabbit. Like my clients come to me and this rabbit is their child substitute. They are absolutely obsessed with it and they want the earth, sometimes unreasonably, admittedly, but equally they absolutely want it. So I think for my clients, it's very rare for me to have my owners miss the issues. Normally they've just been staring at them for weeks on end, so they're going to really pick it up quite quickly. But for those of you in first opinion practice, absolutely you are probably going to have cases that come in completely collapsed because those owners have maybe missed the boat a little bit, or we've got an individual that's kept outside and not monitored quite as much. So prey species, they're going to be hiding signs of pain and illness, and by the time that you look at that individual, whether it is a bird or whether it is a mammal, and you're like, oh, you look bad, the reality of it is they are really, really, really sick and we really need to get a wiggle on. They'll often present in that collapsed state, obviously requiring that oxygen-rich environment. And if we can avoid these individuals putting extra effort into keeping themselves warm, then again, that's where the incubator really, really helps. And then if I've got an individual with respiratory disease, like this rabbit. So this rabbit, hopefully you guys can see the video playing and you can see the nasal flaring on this rabbit is really quite marked. You can really see they're actually using their abdomen to put in a lot of effort with regards to its breathing as well. This rabbit came in for a booster. And the owner goes, oh yeah, no, it's been flaring its nose a little bit. Like it is particularly bad when it comes into the vet. So I think it's just really, really stressed. And actually, we did convince this owner that this is very much not normal. This is marked respiratory disease. We CT scanned this rabbit and it had hands down the worst pneumonia that I've seen in a very, very long time. But this rabbit was smashing food. The owner had literally showed us a video in the console of it that morning binkying around the garden like an absolute maniac. And yes, it had got stressed coming to the practice, and yes, its respiratory signs were substantially worse because it had got its knickers in a twist coming into the car and then coming in and well, we didn't vaccinate it, but coming in for a vaccine, and it made it much, much more obvious. But they just goes to show that they really can hide those signs of pain and disease. Now, one thing that the incubators are really also really, really useful for is actually a lot of them come with nebulizers as well. So this individual, she's in an oxygen-rich, warm environment at this point, but we could also nebulize her too, open up her airways, break down any of the mucus that is up there. And we use a lot of F10 that we can get them to essentially to breathe in. And it helps break down the mucus. It's antiviral, antifungal, antimycoplasmal, antibacterial, anti-everything that causes respiratory issues in these guys. Every exotic species with respiratory issues, quite frankly, I'm probably going to nebulize it with F10 at various different frequencies. So a little bit of more of an introduction to incubators, and I'm sure if anyone's got any questions, both Holly and I are available at the end to expand on this, and obviously Holly's going to be much better at doing it than I am. So the incubators, the reasons why they're brilliant, well, we can regulate the temperature, so we're not increasing the whole environmental temperature that will affect a number of your individuals. We can provide a focal warm temperature, so good. We've got humidity control, so we can humidify that area so it doesn't become too drying. And these incubators have got a hygrometer built into them. We can measure the percentage humidity that we are obtaining inside that incubator. These are oxygen compatible. There are specific versions that are oxygen compatible. I would strongly recommend getting those ones because they are substantially much, much safer using alongside oxygen as well. Obviously, we have to bear in mind oxygen plus a heating element, it needs to have been done properly. And that's the system that we use, the picture that's in this, the incubator that is in this picture is one of the ones that is safe to use with oxygen. They are really quiet. So we've already talked about how we're minimizing that stress. These are really, really quiet. That's, again, not something that we need to massively worry about. You can barely hear the heating fan turning around when your patient is actually in there and you're observing them. It allows you easy access. It's easy to visualize them. Obviously, you can monitor them for a distance because we've got that plastic front. But equally, if we're trying to minimize the stress, it's really straightforward to just put a towel over the top of them. And they're really, really versatile. Not only can you pick them up and move them around, of which my colleagues, if we haven't got an individual in here, all the time our first opinion vets, when they've got a cesarean, for example, this is perfect for warming the puppies up. So they can be picked up, they can be moved around, they can be used for various different species. They come in various different sizes as well. These are the two that we happen to have in our practice. So we've got the 40 and the 50. 50 is obviously slightly larger. I can fit a giant rabbit in the 50 nice and comfortably. And that's pretty much the extent of the species size limits that I would need it for. So it works really, really well in having a range of sizes. They also do a 30 too, but you can see these ones have got the oxygen attachment at the top. We've got the heating element at the top. You can control the temperature, you can monitor the humidity, and we've also got that nebulizer on the side as well. So why do we need to keep these patients warm? Well, our mammalian and our avian patients are homeothermic. They do maintain their own body temperature by their metabolism, but we do need to provide them with a suitable thermoneutral range. Now, this is a range of temperatures of which that individual doesn't need to expend any extra energy to maintain its own body temperature. So these are sort of like the minimum temperatures that we would consider putting these various different species and various different sizes of species at. That means that they are not putting any extra effort because they're sick. They haven't got the energy to spare to keep themselves warm. That's why they end up going hypothermic to start with. But they haven't got the energy to spare to put into keeping themselves warm. So if we've got an incubator at these various different thermoneutral ranges, depending on the species, then that's just extra effort that they don't need to expend. And many of our patients, certainly our very small rodents, our birds, they have a very, very high surface area to volume ratio, which means they lose heat really, really quickly, which means that hypothermia happens very, very quickly. And we have then less time to be able to intervene before we start having particular issues. We do want to be careful with temperatures that are too high. So what I've done here is I've put kind of like the ranges of rectal temperatures that would be pretty acceptable for these various different individuals. I will add that this is also case dependent as well. So if I've got a collapsed rabbit of a temperature of 40, no, I wouldn't deem that as completely normal. So I would say that it does have to be borne in mind with the specific case. The same goes if I've got a really, really bright rabbit, it's running around and it's eating and it's below 38.5, then I wouldn't be overly worried about it either. Certainly in a rabbit, if that temperature is below 37, for every degree below that, they're actually more likely to die with whatever is going on. They're 3 times more likely to die for every degree below that normal temperature. So it is a very accurate prognostic indicator, certainly taking rectal temperatures, and we need to know what those normal ranges are. So if they are in the incubator, we do need to be taking that temperature regularly. We don't want them getting too warm. Equally, if you have an individual that is in an incubator and its temperature is not coming up, we need to be reassessing that situation because there's something else happening that we're not really questioning and not really getting on top of. So that persistent hypothermia, even in a high temperature environment, is a big old red flag. That's something that needs addressing. Bearing in mind, many of our hypothermic patients are also going to be dehydrated, often in hypovolemic shock. So any fluids that we are providing them also needs to be warm to that individual's body temperature. There are obviously other ways of keeping those patients warm as well. So you've got like the snuggle safes, bear huggers and things. But if they're in an incubator, they shouldn't need additional heat sources in there because we're already providing that ambient temperature. And if that temperature isn't going up, there's no good adding just extra heat sources in. That needs to be investigated. And the incubator is definitely the best way out of theatre, certainly in my opinion, of keeping those temperatures up and supporting those individuals, except in reptiles, of that's where the vivaria are more appropriate. And the reason is the reptiles are polycothermic. They require an external heat source to warm themselves up. They cannot generate their own heat like the birds and the mammals. Now, okay, in a pinch, an incubator is not going to hurt a reptile at all. You've just got better ways and more appropriate ways of providing heat. And the way that we do that depends on the individual species. So every different reptile, whether that's a bearded dragon or a corn snake, is going to have its own preferred optimum temperature zone, of which within that they can move between the hot and the cold ends to regulate their own temperature. There are hundreds, thousands of different species of reptile. I'm not expecting you to know those high and low temperature ranges for all of those individuals. But what we have done with Just Exotics is that every single species that I have ever seen in practice, of which that covers hundreds of them, myself, my amazing team, we have gone away, we have researched them, we have created a care sheet that is on the Just Exotics website. So for every species of reptile, including the birds and mammals as well, every single species that we have ever seen, there is a care sheet available that is completely free to download. So you don't need to remember the hot and the cold temperatures of this random lizard that you've never seen before. But the way that we provide that heat is also really important, whether that reptile is a helicotherm, where or heliotherm, whether they are getting their heat from a radiant heat source or whether they're a thigmotherm, so they actually get their heat from a conductive heat source, so they sit on a warm rock that has been warmed throughout the day, for example. We need to be providing that heat source in a way that is suitable for that individual. And like I said, the incubator for a short-term period of time is absolutely better than nothing for sure, but it's not suitable for a long term, or it's not suitable for maybe like a critical reptile patient that needs more intensive management. When it comes to humidity, we need to be able to humidify the air. Otherwise, it's going to be too drying. We're going to have drying to the corneal membranes, the mucous membranes, and the incubators do provide a humid environment. What I've done here is I've just provided the kind of ranges of percentage humidities that we would expect for these various different species. And obviously we want to avoid drying out those mucous membranes as much as is possible. And the incubators come with their own hygrometer and it reads out the percentage humidity on there. The use of oxygen, well, we've already kind of briefly touched on why this is important and when we would absolutely use it for certain in anesthesia recovery. Up until these patients are back to their normal rectal temperature, baseline heart rate, baseline respiratory rate, up and about, mooching, eating, we want to be providing them with a warm, oxygen-rich environment. But with regular monitoring, we're lubricating their eyes so we're not drying them out too much. We're minimizing opening and closing the door of that incubator as well, so we're not losing that oxygen that we've just built up in there. You should always consider positioning in our respiratory patients as well. They're obviously much better in sternal recumbency. So maybe lifting their chest, certainly in the hindgut fermenting individuals where they've got a big gastrointestinal tract that you want to get off the diaphragm, lift their chest up, put them in sternal recumbency. That can definitely make a massive difference. And again, humidifying that oxygen is really, really important. So we have a kind of a humidifier bubbler that we attach to the incubator. So we are pumping already humidified oxygen into these environments. Nebulization, any exotic species that has respiratory disease, and this is when we do use our incubators for our reptile patients, we'll nebulize them inside. Any sort of respiratory issue in any of our exotic patients, we will nebulize them with F10. You can provide F10 ready to use. It's already diluted, and you want to use the antiseptic solution, not the disinfectant that's suitable for cleaning the surfaces. It is the antiseptic solution. They're two different colored bottles. Don't mix them up. Or you can buy the super concentrate F10, of which you then dilute it 1 in 250. So 1 ml of F10 in 250 ml of saline or distilled water, for example. And yeah, it's an excellent expirant as well, so you can break down those respiratory discharges. One thing I do always warn my owners if I'm nebulizing is that actually you're probably going to sneeze a lot more. That's the whole point of why I nebulized them to start with, because I will have broken down that mucus with that that's antiseptic that I've used. So, inclusion. I think I'm only a couple of minutes over. The You can get away with using a lot of general equipment to start with, but having some of these specialized equipments is really, really helpful. And this is where the incubator comes into its own. Oh, why that's gone backwards, sorry. We want to be minimizing stress as much as is possible. Obviously, the care is going to vary massively between the individual species, so you do want to tailor it to those. I genuinely, and this is not just because Holly is a friend or that I've worked extensively with Veterio. I genuinely, even if I didn't know them, I would still be recommending their equipment because it is invaluable. It halves the amount of time for our recoveries. It means that we can see double the amount of cases. In the end, at the end of the day, it is very much a financial benefit to you as a business in using them as well, because it just means that things go a lot smoother, things move a lot quicker. And it does mean that you can have precise control over their temperature, the humidity, and it is obviously going to help you maintain those optimum physiological parameters that allow you to have an anesthetic that recovers appropriately, but also hopefully a sick patient that stabilizes much quicker and one that you can intervene with a lot faster. So, that is the end of the presentation. I am always more than happy to take any questions. Obviously, you guys can put them down in the chat now, and we can go through them and we can answer them if anybody has got any. Equally, my email address is there. A shameless plug to both of my websites. The one on the left is our on-demand webinar content, of which all of what I've gone through now, there are so many more webinars that cover it. I mean, hospitalizing of exotic patients, I literally just done a whole day of CPD on exactly this. So this is very much a condensed version of that. So that is available both on both websites, a recording of the day that I did the other day and on-demand stuff. But equally, the free stuff, the care sheets, the fact sheets. There's even on there how to nebulize your patient. There's a sheet that has been done by one of my colleagues that you can print off and give to your owners so they can be taught how to nebulize as well. All of it completely free. And like I said, completely free to sign up to the website as well. That's it, Hole.
Thank you so much, Sonia. That was brilliant. There's a lot of things in there that even I've picked up on. So thank you so much for spreading your knowledge on exotic care. We have got a question that's popped in. I think we've just got the one for now. So, guys, if there is any others, we'll stay on for a couple more minutes. If you've got any other questions, pop in the chat as well. The one we've got here is so as a nurse that works in charity hospital that sees companion animals with a few small furries, they operate on from time to time. We unfortunately don't have access to incubators, but instead we try and replicate an incubator with the use of an O2 tent. And that's pre and post op. Is there anything we can do other than purchasing an incubator? So I guess we could probably both
Yeah,
answer.
absolutely. I mean, yeah, there definitely is. So warm air blankets like the bear huggers, if you've got access to those, wrapping your patients up in those essentially does very, very similar thing. You just kind of got like a floppy incubator essentially is what that is. But you replicating it and doing what you can in a charity hospital, which I appreciate is really challenging financially, is perfect. So you want that oxygen rich environment. The bear huggers, you can have flow by oxygen with them, even kind of like the beanies and hot hands and things. They work. I think you just have to be a little bit more careful about them because they can get very, very hot as well. And what we don't want is inadvertent burning. I think the safest way of avoiding that is using the bear hug or any sort of warm air blanket, wrapping your patient with that. And all the things that we've talked about, kind of like minimizing that stress and trying to limit the amount of time that your recovery is taking. And that's where the incubators definitely do help, is that they shorten that recovery time. The shorter it is, the less time they have to have a complication, which is kind of like the ideal situation. But I think you trying to build your own oxygen tent, both pre and post op, is an excellent idea. If we can add some heat to that, whether that's a heat mat or a warm air blanket, for example, then that would be kind of ideal as well. Paul, do you have any other suggestions?
Great. No, I don't think so. I think my only thing would be just to make sure you do really keep an eye on that temperature, because with using an oxygen tent, you will find that the heat can rise quite quickly and uncontrollably, especially if you've got a larger mammal in there. So I would just make sure that you are, yeah, really keeping an eye on that temperature and the humidity as well, where you can.
Right.
But yeah, we understand obviously in that sort of environment, you need to try and keep costs down things as well. What I will say though is do reach out to your veterinary distributor. We have many in all different countries, and they are a lot lower cost than I think people think they are too. They can be affordable, and we have different ones in our range to help with that as well. Sonia's dog's joining in.
Sorry, she's just got home from a walk.
And we also, Sonia, we've got a question about nebulization as
Yep.
well. So, can antibiotics be diluted with isotonic fluids for respiratory diseases in
Yeah,
exotic?
they absolutely can. However, I wouldn't recommend it purely because of the inaccuracy with regards to the dosing. So I think if we've got a respiratory disease individual, then you'd really want to be giving oral antibiotics as much as is possible. I appreciate that can be quite challenging, especially if you've got a really dyspneic individual. In those instances, or if I've got the last time I had to do it was actually a gentamicin case, and it was the single antibiotic that I had for a chronic respiratory disease case that had come to us as a referral, and there wasn't a single other antibiotic that I could use based on the respiratory culture and sensitivity profile. It didn't do a great deal, I found, but equally, that case was pretty awful as well. So, yes, you can dilute it. I just wouldn't recommend it just purely from the inaccuracies that come with it. If it's literally your only option because you've got an individual that's not swallowing because it's so dyspneic, or if, like with me, you had literally no other option but to give it that way, then unfortunately, yes. But I think that involves having a conversation with the clients and being like, I haven't got any other options. This isn't ideal for all of these reasons. We can give it a go, but maybe just manage those owners' expectations as to what to expect with the way that you're giving it.
Thank you. We've also got a question from Sarah, who is currently undertaking her exotic certificates. Good luck. And at the minute, she's asking if you have any webinars for reptiles and amphibians. And yeah, answer that one first, and I'll answer the second part.
I do. I love amphibians. That's why it's all blurred out behind me because there's loads behind me that I didn't think wanted a frog stuck to the screen behind me and distracting anybody. But yes, there are lots and lots of webinars on the Just Exotics website, both the on demand. But also the live events one. I have a whole day coming up covering just reptiles in general. That's coming up in a couple of months' time. I'm actually in the process of writing a fish day and an amphibian day, or potentially a combination of the two. But there is already uploaded on the Just Exotics website that QR code that's on the left hand side. There's already a substantial amount of on-demand webinars covering everything that you could want to know about reptiles and amphibians. Admittedly, there's more reptile stuff than there is amphibian at this point in time, only because it's taken a while to upload some more content because I'm writing a textbook about amphibians and aquatic species at the moment. So that's sort of taken up all my time at the moment. So there will be there will definitely be more content shortly. But yes, there is loads all ready to go. Please have at it.
Great, thank you. And the second part to that question was about reptile specific incubators. So, as a company, unfortunately, we don't do those at the moment. But I believe, Sonia, you use vivariums, I guess, for
Yes.
reptiles.
Yeah, we do. So we have a number of different sizes and shapes of vivariums in practice. We actually use the Herp Tech ones. They're plastic pre-formed, which means there's no nooks and crannies. You could literally fill it with water and it wouldn't leak up until you get to the glass, obviously. So it just means that you can really have good biosecurity in there. They are very spenny though, and they do need to be imported into the UK. They're easier to get on the continent, but we've got UV lighting, we've got a radiant heat source. Our radiant heat source is thermostatically controlled as well. So that's how we would manage our reptile patients. But like I said in the presentation, if I've got a reptile that is dyspneic or has some level of respiratory issues, we actually use the incubators to nebulize them. So like we're not utilizing it for kind of like the oxygen rich environment, and we're not utilizing it for the way that it is producing heat. That's what the vivarium's for, but we will absolutely use it for the nebulizing side of things. It's really convenient in practice.
Great. I've got a question from Diana as well, for me. So what temperature range does Vitario allow, so work with, she's written. But what I would, so with our Vitario incubators, they go from 20 degrees to 38 Celsius. In Fahrenheit, that is 68 to 100.4, I believe. So that is quite a wide range to cover different thermoneutral ranges of different species. I believe we've got lots of thank yous, which
Oh,
is
no.
great. Thank you so much, everyone, for your attendance as well. I think that's it for the questions. If you guys do think of any, do feel free to drop us some messages. So we've got info@justexotics.co.uk for Sonia, sales@vitario.co.uk for myself. But we will also be dropping out an email early next week with the recording of this. And you can reply back to that if you've got any specific questions for me on the Vitario range as well. One thing I will just mention as well, Sonia talked about her really lovely fact sheet she's written on exotics for incubator use. And we do also have those for small mammals. So if you are in a practice that sees small cats and dogs, things like that, then we have those care sheets for those. Also for wildlife care as well. So there's a few things you can reference for questions, and also print out to have in practice. But yes, I think that's everything. We thank you so much for your time, and thank you, Sonia, for that brilliant presentation.
Thanks.
And we will, yeah, we'll wait for your questions if you have any more. And yeah, if you've got anyone else as well that wasn't able to join this evening, they can have the copy of the recording. But we are also doing this again on the 15th of April at the same time, 7:30. If there are any colleagues that want to come on and ask us questions as well, they can join in. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.